very great pleasure to welcome you all to this, which is the second Kirsty Wayland Memorial Lecture. And of course, we think of Kirsty so often. And it's the 19th lecture in the original series of ADRC annual lectures, which began back in 2003. Always interesting, stimulating, and inspiring events for all of us for whom enabling students with disabilities to prosper in higher education, and at Cambridge in particular, is fundamental. Now, very excitingly, it falls to me to advise you that no fire drill is planned, but that if the fire alarms sound, there are exits both sides and two at the back. There are toilet facilities out in the foyer. Can I remind you all, please, to switch your mobile phones off? And I'm also going to mention that the event is being filmed and recorded, just so that you're all aware of that. Having got that out of the way, I'd like to thank really warmly the ADRC team and the ED&I team for all the hard work that you've done in setting up, supporting and running this event. And I'd also like to thank my colleagues here at St John's College in the conference and catering teams for their help. This college is always delighted to support the Collegiate University's primary annual disability event. Now, we're attempting to make this event accessible. We've got interpreters and live captioning, and as it's being recorded, an accessible recording will be made available afterwards. In this, its 19th iteration, the annual lecture remains as important as ever. Across the intervening years since the series began, we've seen a substantial increase in the number of people with disabilities who are participating in higher education, and this both affirms the importance of widening participation work in respect of disability, as well as in respect of other intersecting facets of underrepresentation. And it also itself provides, I think, a positive WP message. But as we rightly say at this event every year, it's vital that we're not complacent, not least because our understanding of disability and of its relationship with education continues to develop, and because in an ever-changing world, new aspects of disability with fresh implications for education need to be explored, discussed, and debated. And it's within that context that it's so appropriate that this year's event will focus upon ADHD. ADHD was a dimension of disability of which we were, of course, aware in the past, but which has appeared centrally and quite vividly on our radar screens in higher education, I would say, in the last 3 years. Really, since the COVID-19 crisis, it's been a thing in a way that it wasn't before. Skepticism about ADHD on the part of some of our colleagues in this university and outside. Where did it come from? Is it real? Are we medicalizing the normal? It reminds me of questions that we faced about dyslexia and dyspraxia a decade or more ago. Questions that are now thankfully behind us because those disabilities are understood and accepted. And I hope that's where we will end up with ADHD. As I say to my colleagues right now, however concerned we might be about a seeming explosion in diagnosis, when we look at individual cases, we keep concluding that there is something there, that this is real. It's excellent that we'll be hearing in this evening's panel event from 3 expert speakers with personal experience of ADHD. There will be a short Q&A after the panel discussion, and I'd be really grateful if people would please ask short and focused questions so that we can squeeze in as many as possible in the time available. And the speakers will be available afterwards for people to ask additional, perhaps more personal questions at the drinks reception, which takes place in the foyer just outside, and to which you're all very welcome, of course. I'm now honoured to introduce Professor Bhaskar Vira, the university's Pro Vice-Chancellor for Education, who will give a short opening address and will introduce the speakers. Bhaskar, thank you.
Thank you, Richard, for that introduction, and from me too, thank you to St. John's for hosting this event and your continued support for the annual lecture. And like you, we think of Kirsty as we have this evening's lecture. In a slight departure from previous lectures, we have a panel discussion, which I think we're all really looking forward to. And Richard, you've already started to introduce some of the key themes that we hope this afternoon we'll get a chance to explore. This afternoon's panel is going to focus on perspectives on ADHD, and I think Richard's already indicated the parameters of that debate. Estimates in adults, I'm told, vary between 2.5% to 6.5% of the population. At Cambridge, the numbers suggest that diagnosed ADHD at the university has increased from 1.8% of the university population in 2019-20 to something like 3.2% of the university population in 22-23. And it does reflect similar numbers at the national level. And there's an interesting debate that follows, which is about whether this is an increased recognition of something that was already prevalent, or whether there's something changing in relation to the nature of the diagnostic process itself. Those are some of the contours of the debate. There are also questions then about how institutions like ours should adapt to that changing expectation from our student body and from our colleagues. We're delighted that we have a fantastic panel of experts who actually do know a lot about the subject, and that's been very kindly facilitated by our colleague, Dr. Helen Duncan, who will facilitate the panel. She's at the ADRC, but the panel itself has depth and breadth of knowledge on the subject. It's my pleasure to introduce them, but very briefly. Professor Amanda Kirby is a medical doctor, Emeritus Professor at the University of South Wales, and an Honorary Professor at Cardiff University, and a visiting Professor at the Faculty of Health Sciences at Trinity College, Dublin. She has clinical and research experience and founded and ran a transdisciplinary clinical and research team for 20 years relating to neurodiversity. She's a qualified GP and has a PhD relating to emerging adulthood and neurodiversity. Professor Paul Wilkinson is the clinical dean at the School of Clinical Medicine here in Cambridge, which he's been doing since 2021, and directs the clinical medicine course. He's a clinical academic, having trained and is working as a consultant in child and adolescent psychiatry and as a research professor, and has spent all of his academic and clinical training at Cambridge. And finally, Portia Ungley is a doctoral candidate at the Faculty of Education at Cambridge. Her research focuses on post-qualitative glimmers in higher education and draws on her embodied experiences as an academic. She's a visiting lecturer at King's College London and a skills support tutor at Homerton College. So I hope you'll agree we've got a wonderful group of people to talk to us about this subject. I really look forward to hearing from you, and I'll hand over to Helen for the rest of the proceedings.
So many thanks to Bhaskar for that lovely introduction, and also to all of you for having come here and given up your time. It's wonderful to see you. So to start off the lecture, our panellists are going to talk for a few minutes about themselves and their experiences. So I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Professor Amanda Kirby. So over to you, Amanda.
Good evening, everybody. I think the first thing to say is I'm an oddball. And I've always been an oddball, but I quite like that. And when I was younger, I really didn't realise why I didn't fit in. I've got children and grandchildren who are neurodivergent. I've got a son who was diagnosed with ADHD, dyspraxia, WLD. I've got a grandson who's got a number of different letters after his name, even though he's only 9 years old. And it really took me a long time to work out that when we went from place to place trying to work out how to support my son, who's nearly 40 now, I was told at that time, 5 years ago or so, he was going to grow out of it, whatever it was going to be. So that was going to be fine. He was going to get a card on his 16th birthday and it was all going to disappear. And that was what we thought about neurodevelopmental conditions. And I was a GP at the time and realised that my experience as a parent was an experience of lots of other parents as well, going from place to place trying to find answers. Now, during that 20-30 year period, I ran a clinical centre because I wanted to find out solutions to this, and then I started doing research, and I've written lots of papers and books all about this, and looked at emerging adulthood, because a lot of the time we weren't really thinking about adults, we were just thinking about children, and we weren't thinking about women either. And the ironical thing during all this time when I was running a clinical service, I didn't think I'd look at myself, even though everybody around me would go, obviously, right? And I look back on my school years and I realized that that odd feeling that I didn't quite fit in was a reason that I was a dreamer, I was a doodler, I was the whisperer to the girl next door. I did endless doodles where I was often told to stop doodling. I was really good verbally, but I kept being told in exams that you just don't do so well in exams. I was always very keen. I was pro-social behaviour, so every time somebody wanted something done, I did it, and I became a prefect, and I became a head girl. I wasn't antisocial, I was pro-social, but at home, that impact on me had an impact on my mental well-being. I would be very highly anxious before exams and wouldn't sleep, and I'd want to avoid taking exams. And I wanted to be a doctor, so this was going to be problematic for me. Even at university, when I got to medical school, I did well because we had an interview, thank goodness, because they saw me in the interview and I spoke, because I knew that my exam results were never going to be good enough otherwise, and I got a place at Westminster in London. But I think it was because of the interview. When I did my written exams, I nearly failed anaesthetics. My father was an anaesthetist. This was an appalling thing to fail anaesthetics because I found physics quite difficult conceptually to do. And finally, though, when I got on the wards and I could see patients and I could take histories and I could do recall, I was fine. Why I'm telling you that is that the system, the education system that I went through didn't fit the way that showed off my skills. And when I did a PhD, when I became a professor, then did a PhD, I've told you I'm an oddball, I do things in the wrong order, that even then when it came to the references at that point, it seemed to be more important to get my Harvard references in the right order with the dots and the dashes than the content of what I was writing. And it took me all this time to realize that I had ADHD. And it's extraordinary at this stage in my life that it took so long. I'm now chair of the ADHD Foundation in the UK. I've got a grandchild who's got ADHD, and he was diagnosed at a young age. And without medication, which he does have, it's made an extraordinary difference to his life. He's only 9, he's a brilliant mathematician, he's a great chess player. I want him to come here, so I'm just letting you know that now. Just getting him in early. But the difference is he would have been excluded from school. And I work with the justice system, with people in prison, and he could have been easily going a different track if he came from a different parents, different grandparents who weren't pushing to gain help and support. So thank you for inviting me this evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, hello. I do various different things in my job, but I guess the main bit that I'm mostly paid for is as Dean of the Medical School. And what that means is I'm basically headmaster of our clinical course. Knowing about ADHD has been really helpful because a group of us have got very interested in how some of our students who are struggling actually may be struggling because they're neurodiverse. And we've made a lot of effort to try and recognise this, to improve awareness of it. And we're finding more and more students are getting diagnosed. And then their exam marks shoot up because they get the appropriate help, because they actually study in the right way. So it's been very useful. So why am I interested in it? Well, partly because of my clinical background. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I still am. In fact, the last patient I assessed turned out to have ADHD that had been totally missed in the first 16 years of her life. I see that quite a bit. And I actually ran the ADHD service the child and adolescent ADHD service in Cambridge for a couple of years when I became a consultant. Back then, I kind of knew I struggled to concentrate in long meetings, and university was a bit tough, but I thought, it can't be ADHD. I'm not like these patients I see. I'm not naughty. I didn't have behaviour problems. You see these stigmas around ADHD, these misconceptions? They're there in doctors as well, and they affect how we see ourselves. Anyway, as time went on, I continued to struggle with my concentration, my organisation. See a few senior academics here. You need to be really well organised to be a senior academic, don't you? Especially if you've got a clinical job as well and are doing lots of teaching. And then one of my friends and colleagues, who's one of the least organised people I know, said, Paul, I've got myself an ADHD diagnosis and I'm on treatment. And it's made a massive difference. And then the penny dropped. Actually, Paul, you've got ADHD. Okay, you actually really do. So anyway, I went off to get assessment. I told my wife I was doing this, worried about her reaction that I was being a hypochondriac, and she said, at long last. After the typical NHS 4-year wait, I went on medication last summer. Boy, I wish I'd done that 35 years ago. Or 45 years even. It's made a massive difference. Because ADHD has affected me as an academic. I've been less organised, less productive. It's maybe 10 mediocre papers I've not published, which I would have done if I had better organisation. But it's not just a disability. When I think about my best paper, still one of the most cited papers in the world in self-harm, made my reputation. That paper actually came out of a study we did where we got the wrong result, we thought, that we didn't expect, we got really annoyed by. I thought about it and I worked it out and I thought, actually, there's a totally different way to spin this. Now, would I have done that if I didn't have ADHD? I don't know. It's easy to say it is, but actually, ADHD makes you more creative. It makes you think differently. It makes you see things other people can't see. So, yeah, it's caused me problems, but it's also helped me, I think. Thank you.
Hi. So I'm in some very lofty company here. I'm a doctoral candidate looking at ways to find joy in academia. Now that sounds a bit crazy in some ways, but it comes through what I call a patchwork career or a portfolio career, where I've been in numerous different situations where I've got to disappearing there, where I've got to a certain level of seniority in various different fields, and I've lost my passion, perhaps. I've been taken in a slightly different direction. Does this sound potentially like a lack of attention? Not really, more like the hyperfocus shifted. It's all in the same area. The doctorate that I'm doing at the moment is a long way from where I started my academic career. I was an academic. I'm now what I'm calling a recovering academic, working academic adjacent. But my process of learning, since I was diagnosed in my 40s, I can hear myself disappearing. Is the sound all right? Ooh, there we go. The process has been so complicated for me because I didn't know I was dyslexic. I just thought everyone found it incredibly difficult to do things. I didn't know I had ADHD. I just thought that, I was a bit quirky, a bit different, found life a bit more complicated. Having the diagnosis has allowed me to unmask and to stop apologising quite as much. I still do it way too much. I am still incredibly hard on myself. And I think for me, the ADHD journey has been about self-acceptance, probably more than anything else. The stigma that's still associated with the way that it's reported, the idea of it somehow being something that would make my life easier. Well, it has made my life easier to know that that's what's going on with my brain, but it hasn't changed the fact that my brain works differently. And at times, it's really tough. It's not fun. But positive, silver linings. There's something glorious about knowing that your brain is not just quirky because of how you think, but because of how it's made. Or maybe that's just me.
Well, thank you so much to all of the panel for sharing those experiences, which I think, they're such real life lived experiences that I think so many people here can really identify with. So thank you so much. So the next stage is that each member of the panel is going to talk at much more length about a topic. So I'm going to start off with Amanda, who's going to be talking to you about the definitions and impact of ADHD.
I'm going to talk to you a little bit about myths and realities about ADHD. There's been a lot in the newspapers, a lot of people saying everybody's got ADHD and it doesn't exist and everything. And I want us to have a sort of a UK and global perspective about it. So I'm going to start off by just talking a little bit about what we mean by ADHD. The first thing is, if I was marketing ADHD, I would change its name. Because, you've got a deficit and a disorder. So And I think this is a thing that we go back to, for a lot of people have not wanted to discuss or share their diagnosis because of the implications of what that might seem. And I said that I wouldn't have said that I had ADHD 40 years ago when I was a young doctor, because I think a lot of people would have thought that I shouldn't be one, or is that quite dangerous to have ADHD and be a doctor? So there have been myths as well. So when we're talking about ADHD, there's worldwide prevalence studies looking, and we're talking about around 3 to 5% of children. We look across the globe. There's always the way of how do you capture data and what you're measuring, but we're talking about fairly consistently, using the same definitions, we're talking about 3 to 5% of children, okay? And we're talking about a recent cohort study. In the UK, we're seeing this explosion of information, but not an explosion really of children and adults being diagnosed. We've got a catch-up situation going on in terms of awareness. We've actually been highly cautious in the UK about how we diagnose ADHD. But I said to you in the beginning that we're catching up now, like we're seeing females being diagnosed who are being missed, girls and women, because a lot of the time before that, our criteria we were looking at for ADHD was a much more male-biased criteria. It's a bit like a list for zebras. So unless you were a female and you looked quite like a zebra, then you wouldn't get a diagnosis. And we're now recognizing the difference in presentation for females, and more females are now being picked up than they are. So there's catch-up going on that we're seeing. But if you look at the prevalence rates of how many girls and boys in the UK, children and adults, we're still very low compared to other countries. America probably over-diagnoses. You know, their colander is a little bit bigger, but we are cautious, we really are. And the lack of support that we're seeing is that we're seeing children and adults are going without gaining diagnosis and support. They're not getting that recognition, they're not getting treatment. And we know from longitudinal studies that the impact of undiagnosed or misdiagnosis is it has an impact on your educational and your employment outcomes. And you can start to see that, because unless you've got the strategies in place to compensate for the things that you're having challenges with, and like Portia said, it doesn't come with all rainbows and roses and sunshine, even though often we talk about superpowers of being associated with ADHD. Most people seek a diagnosis because they're having some challenges in their life, okay? It's not something that you're glorifying, and I think that's really important when we're thinking about this. And we know that without support, you're not getting those strategies in place to allow you to really use your talents and your skills appropriately. So there's lots of evidence looking at offending behaviour, but I've got to be careful about that, because when I do quite a lot of work in the criminal justice system, where we do see high rates of ADHD in people in prison, but it's adversity is the reason why they haven't been diagnosed. It's not neurodiversity, really. They've been missed because they're out of systems. So what do we know? Well, this is a piece of work I'm just doing at the moment. We've taken information from all the commissioning groups across the UK, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, for children and adult services, and I'm just showing you a little bit. Along the bottom axis is each of these is a commissioning group, and this is the percentage of adults, 18 to 65, who've been treated with ADHD medications. Now, why I'm showing you that is that 9 to 25%, so you should have 100% of people who should have ADHD should be being diagnosed, and probably 70% of those being treated with medication. Not everybody's going to be treated with medication. What we're seeing is that we're underdiagnosing hugely across the UK, but there's also huge variability from one area of the UK to another area of the UK. So what does that mean? There's a postcode lottery, right? It also means there's huge variations. Why are some places, we've got definitions we're using, we've got guidelines that we're using for definition to define ADHD, but service delivery models are very different. And that means, depending where you are, depends whether you gain a diagnosis or not. It's going to be more likely or less likely. So when we're talking about ADHD, we talk about ADHD as an umbrella diagnosis, and we're really thinking about subtypes as well. And we can look at combined form or inattentive, hyperactive, impulsivity. We go through a process when we are defining and diagnosing, that I know Paul's going to go into more detail about the diagnostic processes. But what we're trying to do is really, it's quite rigorous. I think that's the other thing. I think it's been trivialized that you go on TikTok, you answer a few questions, and you've got ADHD. But in actual fact, the clinical diagnosis is really thinking about what else is it that it's not ADHD. You're also thinking about what it's not as well as what it is. Now, the important thing that we need to think about in education and in employment as well and in adults is ADHD often co-occurs with other neurodevelopmental conditions, often co-occurs, okay? So about 30 to 40% of people with ADHD have dyspraxia or DCD. ADHD and autism often co-occur. ADHD and developmental language, you look at it. Our brains are not nice and neat and we're messy. What does that mean? When you're supporting a person, an individual, then we need to understand their cognitive profile. We can't just go, ADHD people all need this and autistic people need headphones. This sort of very oversimplistic view. The other bit, which I think is one of the things that we've seen with females particularly, and there's been some studies looking from Cardiff University where they followed up females who'd been given antidepressants, they'd gone along to their GP, they'd had a diagnosis of anxiety and depression, they went back and they followed them up over a long period of time, and they were given a series of different medications where they looked at those individuals who had complex cases of anxiety and depression. Many of them didn't, in fact, they may have been depressed, but they had underlying ADHD at a higher rate. So we've got lots of females now that are emerging because they've been given a different diagnosis in the past. So there is a catch-up going on there. So we know that ADHD and mental health conditions like anxiety, bipolar disorder, and depression, we see higher rates than in the general population. And as I said to you, that ADHD co-occurs with other neurodevelopmental conditions. What's that mean? That means that we do need to understand the pattern of strengths and challenges in individuals, and we can't attribute certain characteristics and say that's all to do with ADHD without considering other parts of the neurocognitive profile. Now, the brilliant thing about humans is we change over time, and that overt hyperactivity that we've typically seen in boys, in young boys particularly, and why they get picked up in school, is that because boys are more likely, there's obviously gender overlap here, but boys are more likely to be more hyperactive, not sit still. They're a nuisance to other people. You get identified if you're bothering other people, basically, right? So if you can't sit still, you're nudging the boy next door, you're not producing the work that you're supposed to, then you get identified. But actually what we see is that hyperactivity, we don't see that overtly in adults in the same sort of way. We do hear people talking about, and I know what that's like, having a very busy brain that's hard to settle down. So what we can see is that as we move from childhood to adulthood, we need to recognize that those symptoms that people thought you should be looking for in ADHD, that's the problem with the name because it's still got the H in it, is that they're not going to be so obvious and we're going to miss them. And as we move to adulthood and we move into an academic situation where somebody might have coped at home till they moved to Cambridge or they moved to university, because what's happened at home, they've had a lot of scaffolding. So they've had a parent who said, make sure you do this and do this. They've had their washing, their cleaning, their finances done. They've been pushed out the door to get from A to B. You've had the academic capability to do the work, but you've had all that scaffolding around you. So what's happening now, we're starting to flip the narrative, and we're starting to say there must be absolute reasons why we've maintained these genes in society. We're starting to say, what are the benefits why these genes have been maintained? Otherwise, we would have bred them out a long time ago. Now, the challenges we've got, and I've got 1 minute to talk about them, is that we have this sort of dichotomous view that either you have it or you don't. You either got ADHD or you haven't got ADHD. And we've got to move away from that because it's about impairment that gives you the diagnosis. And that just because you are sub-threshold, you don't meet somebody's criteria, doesn't mean you've been cured on the way along there to the diagnosis. It just means you haven't met that set of criteria. Now, I think we're changing things. We've moved away from this refrigerator parents and bad parenting, and we're getting better press around ADHD. And I think that's why today we're sitting here and we're talking honestly about having ADHD and not worrying about that. I don't care telling you at my stage of my game. So, but do you know what I mean? But I think I'm at a different stage of my career. I think if you're in the middle stages of your career or you're a young person, people will still be cautious about saying they've got it because they're not sure of the responses they get. Now, at the moment, what we've got is, I think we're generally colourblind. We've focused on certain neurodivergent traits and conditions more than others. And if you've got the wrong set of colour balls, then it's too bad and you don't get identified. 30 seconds. So the last couple of slides, and I'm going to stop, is that really what we've got to see is that some people get misdiagnosed and misunderstood. And a lot of the way, it depends on your entry in whether you're going to get identified. If you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know the pathways, and you don't know how to utilise the system, you won't get diagnosed. And what we can see is that when we look at that, we get neurodiversity plus adversity and greater impact. So last slide is that we have the environment we're in can make us thrive or not survive. And so our implications of this for running services, providing support, and identifying people will really make a difference. And if we've got the talents, we can utilise them because we can minimise the challenges. I'm going to stop there.
Okay, thank you very much, Amanda, for a great talk. I'm going to do the next bit, talk about some of the more medical things. I'm going to cover assessment, which is a tricky one, as any of you who've gone through the process know, and how we treat ADHD. So, assessment first of all. We need to have a balance here. Assessment needs to be rigorous. We've got to get the diagnosis right and not give people labels that they don't apply to them. We also don't want to miss cases, and that does mean quite a lengthy diagnosis. But if you spend too long on it, what's the problem? Well, you get 4-year waiting lists. So it's a very difficult thing to get the balance right between having an assessment process that's practical, that can assess all these people who may have ADHD, but is good enough. I wanted to start with that bit first. We need to cover several things in the assessment. Main thing we do as doctors, especially as psychiatrists, is we take a history. We ask the patient, the student, what's going on in their life. And we ask specific questions relevant to ADHD. Do they have the main symptoms of ADHD? There's 3 areas: poor attention, overactivity, impulsivity, but lots of things within that. Again, as Amanda said, a 25-year-old probably won't be running around the lecture theatre, but they're going to be pretty fidgety in their chair. Again, you've got 3 people with ADHD on that stage. May look a bit different to a normal stage of speakers. But to be a problem, there needs to be impairment. It needs to affect our life. Have these problems made it harder to work, to be students? Have they affected our social life, our family life? Because if it doesn't cause any problems, what are you doing giving a diagnosis? And it also needs to be lifelong. This is something we're born with. It's genetic in most cases. You may not always have been impaired with it, but actually, take the history, it was there. Okay, this was a child who was pretty active and ran around as a toddler. Yep. Wouldn't sit still very long. At school, a bit daydreamy, but was clever, so kept up. But the daydream is there. So we need to check these symptoms. But that's not all we do. We need to be holistic in our assessment. What other problems are there? As Amanda said, many people with ADHD have another area of neurodiversity. Okay, there's common genes that underlie these and some unique genes. Okay, it's quite likely. So ask about everything. And you need to ask about mental illness. Okay, having ADHD can be really hard when the world doesn't fit. Okay, when you're the odd one out, you're the oddball. You're the person who's having to sit down for hours at school and really struggling, and then has to keep getting up and walk around the class and then gets told off and told you're naughty and stupid. Okay, it gets to you after a while. And also need to ask about the social circumstances. What support is there, actually? Who helps? Okay, my wife's brilliant. She's really understanding and supportive. When I got the diagnosis, I was told, you're lucky you've got her. Okay, she keeps reminding me. But actually, what's work like? What's the university like? Are you supported well? But how do we do this? This could take a long time. You could do an interview. Now, that's the best thing to do, okay, except it takes longer. You get the real details when you speak to somebody and you ask them more about these symptoms. Could use a questionnaire, it's quicker, okay? Give it out to them, they spend the time on their own, and then you tick it, you score it, get some information. Although the local ADHD service actually use a screening questionnaire to filter things when GPs refer. I got through it, but it's quite easy to cheat on these things, I guess, but can be helpful. But you shouldn't just use the questionnaires. You need to take a proper history and ideally get information from other people. Especially important when we're seeing kids, we need to ask their parents, which is easy when you work with 9-year-olds because the parents bring them. Actually, what was this child like when they were younger? Were they really active as a toddler? Who's got it in the family? You'll always find somebody, at least one. Different with adults, okay. I mean, my parents lived the other side of the country. I didn't want them to come to my ADHD appointment for various reasons, but actually you can get collective information from other places, school records, work records, uni records. We can do testing. We can do lots of complicated computerized tests or simpler paper and pencil ones. These can give extra helpful information. There's a really good test, well, some people say it's really good, called QB, that specifically tests ADHD symptoms. Pretty expensive. And maybe you do other tests. And actually, what you're not so much looking at is the score on the test, but what's the person like when they do it? Are they sitting still? Do they finish it? Do tests for other problems. Okay, test for dyslexia, pretty important, very common. But the testing isn't just for the diagnosis. It also shows how bad that person's problems are, how badly they're affected, because that's really important if we're thinking about how we help them. We don't just think about yes, no diagnosis. Which areas do they struggle in? Really important at a university. And in terms of what we do here, there is a screening process the ADRC do. I wouldn't call it screening, it's a bit more detailed than that, but that uses a questionnaire to get lots of information, then an interview, and then some psychometric testing. It demonstrates how impaired somebody is and how bad the problems are. That's robust enough for them to say, and people like me to believe, I guess I would do, I'm biased, helps my cynical colleagues to believe that actually that person's got enough problems for us to make adjustments, to give them extra time in exams and so on. However, you need to have a more detailed diagnosis to persuade the NHS to give out medication. Okay? We're pretty short of money. There is a high threshold. It's in America, 10 times as many people get medication. That's because the doctor gets paid for every person they treat. So, how do we treat it? Okay, there's a few medical students here. Hopefully you recognise this as 5th years. But when we think of psychiatric treatment, we split it into 3 areas: biological, psychological, and social. And we need to think about all of these when we treat somebody. I'm not going straight for medication because I'm a social psychiatrist. Often the social intervention is the most important thing we do and we think about. And what does that mean? Well, it means improving someone's social environment. And that is really important in ADHD because most of the problems come because we don't fit with 96% of the people around us. So actually what can we do to that environment to make it more manageable? Okay? Education's really important, helping people to understand. Families, tutors, teachers, employers. Universal design is a biggie. What does that mean? It means actually if you make adjustments to the way you teach and examine, that helps people with neurodiversity, but it also helps everybody. Okay? 2-hour lectures, 3-hour exam papers, screens with loads of text in funny colours. Actually, you kind of change those things, everyone's happy. But we do need to make reasonable adjustments. Despite what we do, people with ADHD and other areas of neurodiversity do worse at medical school exams here and probably in other places. We are not giving people an advantage. We're just trying to level the playing field a bit. So for ADHD, what does that mean? Don't make them have to concentrate for so long, okay? Again, students may be thinking, but you have really long lectures at the medical school. We've got a course review coming up. I'm in charge. Exams, extra time's important, but probably rest breaks are more important, okay? 4¼ hours in an exam, could you get the extra time? Okay, who could sit still for that long and perform well? Rest breaks are key. Help people to learn to organise themselves better, okay? When you're at school, you get lots of support and scaffolding, as Amanda said. You don't get that at clinical school. And actually, you don't really get it at university. So help people to learn how to organise themselves. And extra time. Being more lenient about deadlines, extra time in exams. These things are important and they help level the playing field a bit. What else do we do? Well, the physical. First one is you need to look after yourself properly, okay? Sleep properly, eat properly. Don't self-medicate, okay? Don't buy stuff off the internet or get drunk to deal with your problems. causes issues. But medication is great. Unlike the areas of neurodiversity, someone has discovered that if you give people with ADHD a very small dose of speed, it helps reduce their symptoms dramatically. And it works, okay? It is great. It's the best drug we have in psychiatry, okay? Very effective. Doesn't work for everyone, but about 80% of people it makes a massive difference for. And there's other drugs if the speed doesn't help. Right, what else? Psychological, psychoeducation, okay? Help the student to understand themselves better. Acceptance is key. This may be somebody who's always felt stupid, different, odd one out. Help them to understand themselves better. Help them to know there's other people like them, okay? Maybe hang out with some of these people. Talking therapy for mental health problems, okay? As I said, as everyone said so far, increased risk. Therapy could be needed. Only if you ask about it, though. So in summary, assessment. Diagnosis needs to be comprehensive. How comprehensive? Kind of depends on your resources. American healthcare versus a UK university, it's not the same thing. And we need to ask about a clear lifelong history of ADHD problems, but also everything else. What is their life like? What other things are going on for them? And we can make a big difference, okay? High quality support makes a huge difference. Think of the social environment, what we can do, especially as a university. Think about biological interventions, if you can persuade someone to pay for them. And psychological support, okay? It's worth doing, and we have seen this at the medical school. Okay, we've had students who've failed an exam. They've seen one of my colleagues in the room who's given some very helpful advice on how you study differently with ADHD. Marks go up 40%, okay? That's just by teaching them how to study better, okay? Worth doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Hi there. So I feel like I'm embodying some of what Paul's just been describing, and there will definitely be some things which I hope you will recognise in it. So fundamentally, I guess where I want to start is that neurodiverse doesn't mean less. That I hope in this room everyone would agree, but there is an element of stigma that is really hard to let go of. So I'm taking this opportunity to try and let go of mine a little bit. Before I was diagnosed, there was a way that I described myself. I had a kind of elevator pitch of myself. I was a poet, a former director of learning and teaching at an arts faculty. I was researching a doctorate to find joy in HE. I was running writing retreats and coaching. I was very ND friendly. Post-diagnosis, I'm still a poet, yay. I'm still a recovering academic. I'm still researching a doctorate to find joy in HE. I'm still running retreats and coaching, and I have dyslexia and ADHD. And for some people, that made me less. And that was really tough to take. And I have quite a lot of friends, I'm of that age, who are brilliant, inclusive individuals whose children have recently been diagnosed with some form of neurodiversity, including ADHD, and their response has been gut-wrenching because they have somehow internalized the idea that their child is less and will achieve less as a result. And you know the worst bit of that, the really horrendous bit of that, is that one of those people who thought that I am less post-diagnosis was me. It sounds ridiculous, you know, all singing, all dancing, I'm in this extraordinary situation. I'm very humbled to be here. I'm doing a doctorate at Cambridge. I mean, in most people's eyes, that's quite high up in terms of academic achievement, academic attainment. But what I have sitting on the bottom of my computer is your ability is not in question. And I have to have that sitting on my computer because I have quite low awareness of what I'm worth because I was not diagnosed with dyslexia or ADHD throughout my schooling. I was not diagnosed with it when I found life really difficult doing my first, second, portfolio career, several different degrees and masters. And so I just kind of thought I was a bit stupid and, that quirky wasn't a good thing. And if we look at the 2016 statistic from the psychiatrist William Dodson, Paul, I don't know how you feel about this one, that says that most children with ADHD hear 20,000, we let the 20,000 exist there for a moment, additional critical or corrective messages before their 12th birthday when compared to neurotypical children. It's not surprising that, like, self-esteem is not something that I can be a poster girl for. Poster woman, I don't think I can get away with girl any longer. I quite honestly, I have massive imposter syndrome just standing here on a stage with these extraordinary humans. And it reminds me of a particular story by the writer Neil Gaiman. You may have heard it before. So he was invited to a symposium of the bright and brilliant, and he was standing at the back feeling a bit awkward. I can definitely feel that. And he was standing next to a guy, an elderly gentleman who shared his name. And he was kind of feeling a bit uncomfortable about it. And the elderly gentleman said, I just look at all these people and I think, what the heck am I doing here? They've made amazing things. I just went where I was sent. And Neil Gaiman said, yes, but you were the first man on the moon. I think that counts for something. And a lovely picture of him with Neil Armstrong. If Neil Armstrong can feel like an imposter, this is not an odd feeling. This is something that most people can identify with. But if you are neurodiverse, if you have ADHD and you have this cheeky little friend, rejection-sensitive dysphoria, which means that you take everything perhaps a little bit too much to heart, it can really kick your butt. And the idea that anyone would try and game the system to feel as awful as that can sometimes feel makes me a little bit cross. But neurodiverse does not mean less. I think I'm here because there's a need to display what a neurodiverse doctoral student at Cambridge looks like. I'm not representative because that's the joy about being ADHD, right? We're all a little bit different. And actually the way in which we are able to deal with our difference is different as well. The way that suits us, whether it's through medication, whether it's through talking therapy, or any variety of the different ways that we do it, we all have a slightly different perspective. But I feel kind of privileged that when I was teaching at an arts faculty, I had a year when I was running courses where there were 73% of my students coming in who had a statement of support needs of some description. 73%? How could I possibly not do universal design? How could I possibly write a course for 27% of my cohort? I wrote it for the 73%. And as a result, I got special educational needs qualifications, and I did some psychology on the side, you know, the patchwork again, that portfolio career, grabbing different ways of validating myself. And I think that in a funny way, I thought I did it because my students needed me. But I think I needed them back because I was still desperately trying to find my place within the academe, what it looked like to be someone on the senior management team who still can't, well, you know, I have to have something to do in a meeting because otherwise I will lose concentration. Give me something to fidget with. Let me doodle. My lovely boss used to let me knit because it just took enough of the edge off that I could get through a 3-hour meeting. Who has 3-hour meetings? But how I navigate some of those tough bits is, well, when I coach, when I have neurodiverse clients nowadays, all I can offer is what works for me, and I know what works for me isn't necessarily going to work for everyone else. So I've tried the Pomodoro technique. Yeah, forget it. I've tried getting dressed to your shoes. I don't know if anyone's come across this, to be in the right mindset. I've tried, what else have we had? bug-related decluttering personalities. Yeah, whatever. But that doesn't work for me. What does work for me is getting into the kind of the nuts and bolts, because I actually, bizarrely, for an arts lecturer, I have quite a rational, dare I say, a mind. So I really liked discovering how to stimulate different happiness chemicals. I have a bit of an obsession with happiness and joy. So I created a neurodiverse scavenger hunt, which set out to go and find serotonin and endorphins, not endorphins, endorphins, and oxytocin, and all of these kind of things that make you feel good as rewards. And then I set it up as a scavenger hunt for some of my clients so that they could get that like hit of yes. Does that work for everyone? No. But does it work more with my ND clients than my NT? Yes. And do my ND clients, sorry, my neurotypical clients, too many acronyms, do my neurotypical clients also love it? Yes. So that universal design is absolutely where I want to be. During COVID, I ran an online coffee group for doctoral students because we kind of lost that sense of collegiality. And the people who came, some came because they wanted to talk about work and childcare and, you know, housing and high-level stuff. But there was also a large group who came because they couldn't use informal hacks to get through their day. They couldn't nip out to a coffee shop when being in their home or workspace no longer worked. When they couldn't go for a walk because the noise in the head, the bees, as I tend to think of it, just were too loud and you just didn't want to speak in a straight line. How does that go so quickly? So the idea of masking fails, that idea of being able to mask fails at certain levels. Skipping that bit. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Jude Carroll for a second. Jude Carroll wrote a book chapter in 2005, and she calls international students the canaries in the coal mine. And at the time, there was a lot of interest in VLE, virtual learning environments, and international students were bringing in a substantial amount of financial benefit to universities. And funnily enough, the work was done and the stats got changed, and international students were no longer being that moment that said there's a problem, there's a systemic problem with the way that we're teaching this group. And I think maybe it's time to make the neurodiverse students the new canary in the coal mine. Yeah, I'm criticizing universities. I'm waiting for the ceiling to fall on my head. It's time for that universality of design, which benefits both neurodiverse and neurotypical students, all of them, to be accepted. I'm not suggesting that students get, neurodiverse students, ADHD in particular, obviously I'm biased, that they get extra love. You know, I'm not asking for a favor here. I'm asking for the fundamental perception of what constitutes good, rigorous education to shift in HE particularly, but also in secondary and primary education. Why can't education aim to be Brian Arau and Kirsty Clemens' safe spaces for all students, whether they're neurodiverse or not? Why can't we aim for, I love this quote, why can't we aim for deep, inquiry-based and equity-based learning that sufficiently challenges and encourages all students to achieve their full potential, including both academic and broader development? Neurotypicality is not enshrined in that definition, or actually any definition of academic rigor. So why are these shifts so hard, so challenging? Why is there so much resistance? We tried treading softly about these things. I think it's now time for radical acceptance, which asks for us to trust in our innate goodness, to accept ourselves, all of ourselves, to accept that ADHD and other neurodiversities exist. They're a branch of the evolutionary tree that 25% of the population live on. and that we have so much to offer. If people would just stop expecting, you should know this one, us fish to climb a tree. Because, and this is quite exposing for me as a former academic, as a coach, as a doctoral student, before I was diagnosed and before I got support, I was failing. That tree was becoming unclimbable, despite my qualifications, despite my experience, and despite my intelligence, positivity. So ADHD doesn't mean less, and my ability and yours is not in question.
Well, thank you to every member of the panel for such insightful, thought-provoking and enlightening talks. That's just been amazing. Oh, thank you so much. And I think, unfortunately, time's got the better of us and we're sort of completely out of time. But as our discussion comes to a close, I'm sure you'd like to join me in thanking the panel for such insightful...